All right. And we are back with the next installment of the media show with Professor
Yay.
Beth Egan and me, Craig Pavia, here from outside, just outside of New York City. Today we have a wide ranging conversation and a guest. So we've brought in a guest who's going to help us discuss how we're going to save the internet. Me, Beth Egan, a couple of friends, and we're going to fix it all up once and for all. But first, Beth, before we talk about saving the internet, I want to talk to you about saving my television watching. That's all going to be next here on the media show. All right. So before we bring in our special guest, Beth, I wanted to bring up a topic that I know you and I discussed, I believe over coffee, maybe in the wintertime. And it's come up only because I had another case of this, which is, and I know the world is cutting cords. In fact, we've cut the cord. Let's just, I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know anybody anymore who has cable, an old cable box and a cable remote. It doesn't
Don't
exist.
know why you would.
So at this point, I am not railing against ad pods or multiple ads being shown at me. No, no, no. This conversation, and I know this has to be hitting at home for you as well, is the actual physical act inside of a connected TV environment, be it Roku, be it Apple TV. Those are the two that I have, one in one area of the home, one in the other, of getting in and out to watch a live sporting event, switching between two CTV channels. And I'm going to name names here. I know we don't like
Okay.
naming names, but since I'm blaming them all, okay, this is where I'm going.
All right.
So I've got the Knicks, right, on my Fubo. I have baseball on another channel. I'm trying to remember which one. And then I had another basketball event that I wanted to watch on TNT, which is through HBO. I'm just going to tell you, and this goes back to last fall when the Yankees were in the World Series. My Knicks had just started, and I had a football game that my brother wanted to watch. This is a near impossibility. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, what are we going to do to fix this? Or do we need to go back to the future of 1979 and go back to push button TVs? Because I couldn't believe that when I went back, and I don't know if you, Terry, I don't know who's seen this, but when I went back to jump from one channel into the other, which is clunky from the remote, and then I go into HBO Max, or I'm sorry, Max, it
It's
runs an
HBO
ad.
Max. Like how they drop that
Right,
name
it's
is
HBO
insane.
Max. Okay, good. I'm glad you said that. So when I go back in, it runs an ad. So I'm missing, in other words, like I jump back into HBO, they want to run an ad before I begin to watch the show again.
Yeah, yeah,
And this creates a loss of time that you just don't get back.
yeah.
And then you're jumping back out. And I wanted to know your opinion. Like, is this a hardware problem? I think we're not talking about, maybe we are talking about software, but are we looking at these remotes? Are these companies going to consolidate? Am I doing this wrong? Comments below, because I wonder if I should put everything in Apple. Can I do that? Will it work faster? These are the questions that I have for you.
Well, I think it's greed. I don't think it's a hardware problem. I think technology can easily solve that problem. And I'll tell you, the struggle is real because I mean, we split our time between New York and Syracuse, and YouTube TV doesn't know that because I use a VPN to stay in New York, up in Syracuse. But unfortunately, I married a Mets, Jets, Rangers fan.
Yes, we mentioned
So
that last time. The the jet side
it's
of this is tough. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's all but yeah, even getting access, you've got to buy like 3 or 4 different services, and even still, if you're in New York, you're getting blacked out because you're in the New York DMA. And
Yeah.
look, I'm sympathetic to the fact that live sports is one of the last places where these networks, these stations can actually make money. We've talked about this. We want them to make money. But interrupting the fan experience is not the way to make that happen. And so I don't know. And like you, welcome comments, please, folks, who are in the know, let us know what's going on here. But it sounds to me, looks to me more like a matter of they've got your eyeballs coming in and they want to make some money off of that before they get you to the game.
It would, I mean, but before we bring in our guest who actually might actually have some answers in this category as well.
Because they're much younger
The
than we are.
conversation, yeah, the conversation has to be said that for whatever reason, Fubo is not protecting the content with another ad. So when I go back into Fubo, I was able to just pick the Knicks game up and scroll over and pick up the live side of it. My
How much are
issue
you paying
really
for
was with
how
the
much are you paying
Max
for
side
Fubo?
of it. I don't know anymore. I
A
mean,
lot.
and this is where I assume that my bill every month now, between who knows what my kids are buying, Paramount, all the different stuff that's in there, I'm assuming I'm paying way more than I was paying, whether or not I was paying cable
I'm sure you
or
are.
not. But and this to the point is, I'm only watching sports, right? And we're going to talk with a great guest coming up about I'm going to, we're going to really talk about the open web and where this is all going with paywalls and all these things of how we're going to keep journalism alive. But in this case, I don't even watch the news on TV, right? I'm reading news.
Mhm.
I'm getting news
Mhm.
from podcast. I'm getting news from Sirius satellite radio, right? I'm never
Mhm.
watching news. I have not put on the evening news or any of that stuff on television. I'm strictly watching sports online, or I'm pulling up YouTube videos. So this is an interesting question because I think it's actually a hardware issue. I think that, and I might throw myself an experiment here. Like I said, I did, last time I tried to get off all
Yeah.
data on my phone. Maybe I'm going to try to put everybody into Apple TV, because
Yeah.
I see that Apple can kind of run everybody through the Apple TV app rather than go into the main app area. Let's see if
Yeah.
that's
See what
a
happens.
solve. But
I like it.
let's
Or it's
welcome
an
in our
idea for
guest.
another guest.
Yeah. Let's welcome in our guest for today. I'm just gonna bring him in. Why not? And we'll let Simon introduce himself. How about that?
Surprise guest.
Surprise guest.
No spoiler alerts.
All right. Surprise
Hey, Simon.
guest, Simon.
Hey guys, thank you for having me.
So we
Love it.
just popped
Thanks.
you in, Simon. We're gonna let you introduce yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm Simon Gonnet. I work in account management at the trade desk. So here today to talk a little bit more about the open internet and focus on journalism and can advertising save journalism.
I love the topic. I don't know the trade desk. What is that? I don't know. No, only kidding. Of course, we know who the trade desk is. Never
Yeah,
heard of it. No. Yes, and this is going to be a heck of a topic. I think we're all going to have a lot of fun here. This is a passion of mine. I know Beth is deep involved in this. It sounds, and obviously seeing your kind of preparation for this, Simon, has been fantastic. But I wanted to kind of start it off with some observations on my own, which is the evolution of the paywall.
mm,
And I'm starting to kind of bounce up against it quite often, even on sites that I would think were completely kind of open and free and advertising supported exclusively, right? We're starting to see subscriber only. I want to say I just saw it on an article that I really wanted to read on CNN, right? Which subscriber only, which is the first time, right? This is kind of new to them, where they were doing everything via, looked like advertising support. And I just wanted your impression, from your side. What do you see? What do you see happening? Is the evolution, where are we going to be going in the next 5 to 10 years, and where does ad tech fit in? And I'm not asking, like this is exclusive about the trade desk. I'm saying, is ad tech doing enough to keep these businesses going is kind of my thesis. So I wanted to get I think Beth and I are very intrigued by your research and what you've been, how you prepared for this conversation.
Yeah, so it's a tough question to answer, but this whole idea of paywalls really gets to the root of the problem, which is that for quality journalism to exist, journalists need money or resources to hire good journalists and actually do diligent research. And so these publishers or these journalism companies need to find a way to get revenue. And publishers really only have two ways to make money. They can either sell ads or sell the attention of their readers, or they can ask their readers directly for money. So this is why we're seeing paywalls pop up, is because advertising, or the way the supply chain exists in today's ecosystem, isn't sufficient to drive revenue for these publishers. So they're going to option B, which is asking their readership base to pay them directly. But that can
sometimes in the form of like a Patreon or a donation, right? Like I've seen that. I want to say Vox and a few other places are like, hey, join us. But then I also obviously I subscribe to the New York Times, so I pay for that, right? And now I've noticed that the New York Times has segmented out so many sections out of my subscription, right? I don't get sports, I don't get cooking, right? You have to kind of add. It's an ad hoc environment. When it comes to somebody who's been digital forward your entire life, where does that leave you? Because I know where it leaves me and Beth. I mean, we lived in the world of magazines. We lived in the world of, having a newspaper. And I'll just, say this. I know Beth and I are really going to love this conversation, but like pass along readership, right? We mentioned People magazine in our first episode. Like People magazine was left in, some waiting room at a doctor's office and got, 40, reads from that. You don't leave your post on the train anymore, right? So that's one of the issues.
I come across fascinating articles every day that have a very catchy headline, and when I click on the link, whether it's on Facebook or other places on the internet, I'm always annoyed that I encounter a paywall, because I can't necessarily afford 10 subscriptions, right?
Yeah.
And that really creates an issue, because it creates an asymmetry of access to information for people. So if you have the means to get 10 or 20 subscriptions and have access to quality information whenever you want, that's great. But most people understand that that's not an option for everyone. So there's ways to get around paywalls, but I always feel a little guilty, because I understand the effort that was put into actually making this quality piece of content.
Wait, what are those words?
Right. I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Beth. Go ahead.
Archive.ph is a good one.
Good to know.
I've been in the business for a while and tried to, in my own media product a while back, probably in the, 2013, 2014, 2015, we tried to rig it in the sense of we would have a single sponsor for a video series, right? We went heavily into video from content, and even that wasn't enough, right? So you understand, the idea when I started in this business, there was a writer, there was an editor, there was a copywriter, there was a photo editor, there were computers, there were these things called cubicles. Not everybody worked from home, and this all cost money, right? And there was a sales team and whatever else, and you're building that. I feel like now when it comes to, and I know, you've mentioned in your deep notes here, we're talking really about hard news. Beth and I were just, riffing on sports, live events on CTV. But when it comes to hard news and local news, which are two dramatic areas that we've kind of really lost, and have really kind of segmented each other, right? Like like the division of reading news and information is severe now, because you are not picking up the New York Post on the one train because somebody left it there, right? And flipping through and reading, let's say, the other side of the article compared to the daily news or whatever. Now you're siloed, right? Your 4 or 5 sites. I mean, I think I did this exercise with someone else back when I was at AMI, where we actually looked at our history. Many of us were only looking at about 5 to 7 websites a day. That was it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. It does create a lot of issues. I mean, there is something to be said that it's okay to not have access to live sports. It's okay to not have access to this one TV show or this one movie. But I think there is much more of a problem when you can't have access to news or information. I think, I really believe that democracy dies in darkness. And we can talk about, disinformation and all of that, which is a bit of another topic. But not even having access to quality information for the larger general public, I think, is just a societal problem that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, so much of the conversation that's happening now regarding social media, monitoring content and things like that, I think we can take away the political sides of it for this conversation. We can't take them away completely, but for this conversation, because so much of that gets wrapped up in, you want everyone reading the New York Times. It's the elite who want to own the conversation, right. And I don't see it that way at all. To your point, Simon. It's really about, and Craig, you mentioned local. I think what a lot of people miss is local news and local newspapers specifically were the first loss to the internet. That was the first media channel that got sucked up by the internet. And a lot of people want to talk about that in terms of how easily accessible that information was, on your computer. It wasn't on phones yet at that point. But that is not what killed the local newspaper. What killed the local newspaper was Craigslist. And for
tearing the classified ads out.
Tearing the classified ads out. And for I'm hoping most of you who are listening to this don't even know what a classified ad is. But newspapers made their money by it was Facebook Marketplace. Like, take Facebook Marketplace and put that on a printed page that shows up on your door every morning, every evening. And that was probably, Craig, you probably know the number better than I, but it was at least 50% of the revenue for a newspaper.
Yeah, and it was consistent revenue, right? So it was. I didn't work directly in newsprint, but having spent some time at Ziff Davis, where we had a tremendous amount of classified ads, which kind of mirrored that kind of, hey, here's the classified section. The classified section of a lot of magazines, those people ended up to be very successful performance advertising people on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. So if you came out of selling product page after page after page of Dell computers or Gateway computers or something like that in the classified section of a Ziff Davis product, you're well versed in how to help Verizon. Back then there were these huge phone wars, right? You had Singular, you had AT&T, and everybody was battling it out, and they had these classified ads, and they would run local advertising. You would promote phones, you'd promote packages, data, all of this stuff. It really led to, the demise, as Beth has mentioned, the demise of newsprint, certainly at the local level. In fact, just this month, I believe we lost our local newspaper here in Jersey City, New Jersey, which was a big deal because it had, we're a pretty densely populated area, and to not have a local newspaper. And now I'm noticing, and this is what scares me, is most of my neighbors, right, and where I'm looking now and getting my local news is from a service like Nextdoor.
Right.
Right.
Well, so yeah, and that's Yeah, therein lies the issue. And the big retail advertisers, that was actually retail advertising. That was something
Yeah,
different. The classifieds weren't just, me selling my golf clubs on Marketplace because I bought them and never golfed. Um,
right,
it was services. So if you were a small
right. It was your
business, the
plumber. Yep.
classified area was where you advertise your small businesses. It was apartment rentals. If you're looking for an apartment in Manhattan, you went to the classified ads in the New York Times, and it was job listings. I got my first job in New York by answering a blind ad in the classifieds of the New York Times.
Right.
So that was the initial revenue that got pulled out of local advertising and killed it. So then that's what led to the elimination of journalists in those newsrooms. And once that content wasn't useful, that's why people stopped reading them, not because they could get better information online. So, Simon, you see it every day, both in your job and, with your friends as well. Like, how how are you guys creating these habits of where you go to? Craig and I didn't have a choice. Our local newspaper was our local newspaper. But how do you kind of land on what the right content to be interacting with?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we necessarily land on it. I think anyone in my age group will tell you that, and if they're being honest, that they get most of their information from social media, and that
Yes.
doesn't mean that they can't get their information from the New York Times or the Washington Post, but the social media is going to be that first step in the consumer journey to getting access to that information.
Yeah.
So that creates an issue because whereas in the past newspapers were printed the same for everyone, because of these social media platforms, certain information isn't necessarily bubbled up to everyone in the same fashion. So that also adds a bit of a layer of complexity since everyone kind of has content curated for themselves and they don't really decide what they're going to read.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've looked at some of these aggregation tools like a ground news where they're kind of pulling all of that in. I don't know what the uptake is yet. They're still relatively new nascent products, but I maybe that as a space in the future. But realistically, what we're really talking about is social media, right? Acting, and I know this is not a popular topic, but acting as publisher, right? So you're getting, whether you are doing this through YouTube, which is one way to go social media, but Facebook, Instagram, and I'm not on the latest tech, the TikToks of the world. I can't speak to exactly how news would filter through there, but certainly we need to talk about Twitter, right, or X, the platform X, and all these other other products like Blue Sky who are bringing links, and even as far down as a Reddit, right, where Reddit will also share information, news. The issue for the publisher, right, is you're creating the content, you're taking the risk. These publishers cannot just run this through advertising, right? We can't make enough money on the advertising on a long form article written about a local restaurant or a building being built, something that would be germane to local news, or a battle between two city council members, is not going to draw the advertising that, let's say, something that a president is doing, right? So that content has just more or less disappeared, and now we're starting to see everything go behind a paywall. And if everything goes behind a paywall, then we're really in a situation where we're siloed and we're not sharing data, right? The only place where I'm getting news that I think other people get it would be when I listen to the news on Sirius XM, right? That's those are going to be kind of like a terrestrial radio, obviously satellite radio, but in this case familiar to me where I can just get news pumped into my ear as I'm sitting and doing some work. Outside of that, I don't think anybody is sharing any information unless I'm sending it, via Twitter or, via some link to my family and friends, right? There's no sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to be sharing what you receive, but yeah, there isn't the same homogeneous distribution of information at the local level or the national level anymore. The industry has completely changed, and these tech companies have found a really smart way to, like you said, act like the publisher, but they're not the ones that are hiring journalists. They're not the ones that are hiring editors, right, producers to actually make all this content. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of value in user generated content. I think it creates a lot of opportunities for people to go out there and create, make their art or their opinions discoverable, which I think is a net good for the world. But there are issues that arise with how this content is then being pushed out to the rest of the world. Right. And these platforms have found a way to take other people's value creation in the media space, profit off of it without really being accountable to what or how this information spreads. And I think that is kind of the root of the problem here.
So I work. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
This goes into advertising as well. So, in an ideal advertising ecosystem or market, if an advertiser wants to pay $7 for 1,000 impressions, that publisher selling 1,000 impressions should see around $7 or close to that $7. But right now, in the current state of the media market, advertisers will pay $7 and publishers will then receive $2. And these tech companies are taking a huge chunk. Again, this also hits to publisher wallets. It makes them have to decrease in size or put up paywalls or find other ways to stay alive, really, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously ad tech itself has a role to play here, particularly on the open web, but forgetting the open web, just going back to the platforms, the linking and everything else that's going on inside, you surface an article in almost any social media platform, you're not getting, they're taking somewhere between 70 and 90% of the margin, leaving the publisher. The advertiser is going to get their advertisement shown. Mm-hmm. But the ad tech is going to be a big component of it, particularly that connection. And I think that needs to give a little bit. And then what we talked about earlier, and I do understand. Look, I mean, I think that when we were initially looking at the internet and we looked at paper, right, and the idea that we were printing on newsprint or magazines, and then we were transitioning all of that to the internet. Everybody thought, oh, the paper and the print, once that goes away, you don't have to send it, postage, nothing like that. It's going to be free. But that wasn't the case. That was never the case. I'll just mention, so you mentioned a $7 CPM. I was in a meeting with one of my bosses where he took his big finger and put it into my chest and said to me, nothing less than a $40 CPM. Right, for that. So we were calculating CPMs in some sections of our magazine. And that was the least, that was the lowest price I could offer. And keep in mind, there was no ad tech to take anything out of that. Yes, there was postage, there was printing, there was, paper. Yes, but those are fixed. That's a fixed cost. Mm-hmm. And, that $40 CPM covered that. I think this is where the illusion, which I mentioned earlier, was, and at the time, the biggest player in the space that I remember was Yahoo, right? Yahoo was showing up to big publishers and saying, hey, we're going to share your article. We're going to give you a rev share on what we see. And I think in the minds of publishing executives, it was going to be a boondoggle, right? It was going to be, oh, everybody's going to want to read my article on how to plant a pine tree in their backyard because it's great service journalism. And then when they found out that those CPMs were actually more like 30 cents and 70 cents and $1.20, and you had to have hundreds of thousands of views to make that up, that's when the reality of this came in. And I'll give you guys a great example. Motor Trend, Car and Driver, Road and Track, their websites for years were nothing more than a subscription page. They didn't put any of their content up online because they knew if you put that car content up online, guys like me were just going to go read it online. We didn't need to go grab magazine. And they still struggle. You know, they went into video, right? I mean, that's really where the automotive business has gone. And I don't know, Simon, if you have an opinion on the idea of these brands that were not native to video and are now kind of bridging into video because the promise of higher CPMs and more monetization with video. Where is that going?
Yeah, no, I think it's something we definitely see a lot. For example, Condé Nast, I think is a great example. So Condé Nast is really known for their print magazines, but if you think about Condé Nast today, they're really embracing the short form format. And it's a way for them to attract new advertisers or have budgets renew. Having a video on their YouTube where they'll show like celebrity homes and it's sponsored by Kohler or whatnot is completely different. Is a complete 180 from the print magazine logic. So it is short form video. Or medium format video is really being embraced by all these publishers, notably famous magazine brands like Condé Nast. Yeah,
Hearst, Condé, they're all they're kind of they're building into that space. They've done look, I mean, a lot of them have done great jobs. I would, I think keeping those brands alive. I mean, I watch a lot of Bone App, right? I get a lot of information on recipes and stuff like that off of YouTube. I just struggle to understand how they're going to really make money, right? Like where's the real benefit, right? These brands are completely removed from the lexicon in many cases, right? Just 20 years ago, you couldn't talk sports unless you were talking about Sports Illustrated, and you couldn't talk entertainment without talking about People Magazine or Entertainment Weekly. And those have kind of fallen by the wayside and given way to social media influencers. I was part of a team working on Muscle and Fitness magazine. And I'll never forget in 2013, I had somebody walk in with a bodybuilding influencer, a fitness person, and they had 2 times the amount of followers that Muscle and Fitness had. And I knew right then and there, like, you just do the math. The advertiser is going to obviously go to that guy and say, hey, can you share my product, right? Rather than come to us. We had editors and people to pay, right? We were printing magazines, we're doing events, we're doing all this stuff. And meanwhile, some guy in his house with a gym set up is going to get, the traction on the dollars. This doesn't leave much space for really beautifully produced content, which takes us back to news, right? And the most important thing with news is having an editor, is having a fact checker, right? Is having somebody sitting on top of that. That costs money. You can't, I mean, I'm a fan. I watch a lot of online, punditry and stuff like that, but fact checking is not always there. This is the problem.
Yeah, completely. I think the problem in terms of how much revenue these publishers can take in was highlighted in your Bon Appetit example. So you watch Bon Appetit videos, but you watch them on YouTube. You don't watch them on bonappetit.com. And that's
right.
Really the root of this all is YouTube is actually the real platform. So they're controlling the whole video aspect, and they're the ones advertisers are paying, right? So essentially, yes, Bon Appetit might make more money through that format. They might justify higher CPMs. But at the same time, Google is going to take the biggest chunk of that CPM.
Right.
But to be fair, I don't know if that's necessarily bad, because also to your point, someone who makes cooking videos at home might do a better job, might be more engaging. And that's just fair competition at the end of the day. So someone cooking videos might do a better job than Bon Appetit and might do it for less money and have more views, and so be it. But then, to your point, that doesn't apply to every realm of media. So cooking videos is fine, but journalism is a completely different ballgame, because now you have people who are at home, with a camera and a microphone, doing the same thing as journalists, right? Without editors, without fact checking, without the whole process and the whole structure that's been established for years to really create quality fact check journalism. So someone can, very effectively and cheaply, just, they could say the truth, but they could also just repeat what they saw online, and not all of that might necessarily be true or unbiased. So that, in itself, is going to create much more of a problem than cooking or fitness videos.
So you're young.
Oh, go ahead.
I have to believe that you're hopeful. So, what's your optimistic scenario here? Like, how do you see us going down um, a path towards, getting back to some better equilibrium between, like, we've all agreed there is a value to user generated, the editors weren't always right. Yet we've lost the fact checkers, we've lost, I would argue we've lost the truth. So what's kind of your message?
Yeah, it's not a completely optimistic view, unfortunately. I think that there's no way to really get around it. I think people are just going to consume what they want to consume and what the algorithm feeds them, and it is going to, shift their ideas or shift their views. Where I am optimistic, however, is that I think that the internet has a way of holding people accountable at the end of the day. And I think that most people are very rational. And I think that most people understand that, and especially in my age group, that what they see isn't necessarily true. I think that there's much more of that understanding than for older generations. I can think of my grandma that might believe anything she reads online, right? But for someone who really understands the social media, since we kind of grew up with that, we know that fake information can spread. We've seen it happen. And I think that, the vast majority of us are, at the end of the day, pretty rational thinkers. So I think I don't foresee the ecosystem getting much better in the near future, but I think that we are adapting to the ecosystem and have more of a question mentality, and that's kind of a double-edged sword.
My take on this is two things. I think number one, I think there'll have to be some major consolidation, right? We were talking about CTV before, where I was talking about consolidating all my channels in one player, but in this particular case, I'm talking about consolidation across a large format company, an Apple or a Google or somebody, kind of bringing in all of these brands so that I think that there'll just be a stress limit to how much money somebody is going to spend on all their media, right? So consolidating is the only way to do it. Like I've thought, like, I don't understand how Sirius satellite radio hasn't been purchased by somebody else and then folded into their other products, right? Like that escapes my mind. Podcasting is becoming a bigger and bigger player in the space because that somehow has remained essentially free, right? You can do some membership stuff with getting released podcasts early. And then lastly, I do believe that, and I think it's, Simon, it's probably your generation and maybe the generation behind you. I do think that there's going to be more flexibility with paywalls. I think that you're going to be more forgiving than, let's say, I would be, where I would say, well, if I'm going to pay $9 a month, or $9 a year for that matter, for, a carandriver.com subscription, then I want the magazine. And they can't print the magazine and do the website and do videos for $9, right? So they're going to have to be give and take. And I think that there'll be some form of paywall here. I think we're seeing it, right? We're marching towards it. I mean, I can just see all of the websites that I'm going to completely covered in paywall soon enough, maybe in the next 2 years, because there simply isn't enough money coming through the advertising side because of the things that we talked about, right? How difficult it is to get somebody to come to an open website when it's so simple to kind of just live in your whatever social media world you're living in and read the first 2 lines and not dig in deeper. And then obviously number 2 is, where is the benefit of the long form content, right? What am I really going to be enjoying it? I think that's where the paywall comes in. I think that's where that's where this is going to end up. I think from the media side, if I were putting my publisher hat on, Beth, I would think that most of these publishers of websites are thinking there's no other way. If I'm giving up even as low as 50% of the advertising dollar, which is, I think they're giving up more than 50%. I think that these publishers are going to need to wall everything up.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure put on consumers with all these paywalls. It's just impossible to have all of these subscriptions, right? But there's content you know and love everywhere. So I think there's pressure in general from the industry as well to just give publishers higher CPM and advertisers higher value. And I think they need to just have more ownership on the data of their readership or who are these people that are consuming the content. And the reason that's really important and kind of goes against the general privacy discourse that we hear today is that if a publisher knows who's reading their content, they're actually able to justify a higher price to an advertiser that is going to be willing to pay a higher price. So it really creates a win-win for everyone, right? The publisher is able to increase revenue. Advertisers are much more confident in the money they spend. And then the consumer, the one, consuming the media, is able to pay less or is able to get that content for free. And also the ads that are going to be served to them are going to be much more relevant. They're not going to see the same ad for the 12th time today. They're going to see something new, maybe. Maybe something that is relevant to them. So I think I hope that we're moving more towards this dynamic and that we can shift away from this privacy dialogue that I think is extremely misinformed when you take into consideration all the players in the space.
Professor Egan, close us out. Tell us what's going to happen. Predict the future.
Simon, I think you did a fantastic job right there of, really talking about where is it that we need to end up. And, you all know that I agree. I think this privacy debate is misinformed. And I think everything you said around, let's know who we're talking to. There is a value to that for advertisers. And there's a value to that for consumers.
Well, on that bombshell, we will conclude this episode, but I think, Simon, we're going to have to bring you back. We're going to have to continue this conversation, and I'm going to preview something that we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode, and maybe you'll join us for that, which is going to be the idea of the influencer and the idea of this entire world, this ecosystem, which runs on different channels, but also runs across many of them. The differences between, we can use the example of cooking videos, right? Of how we started, Beth and I probably saw Julia Child in a studio and with cameras all over, all the way to now binging with Babish or somebody who's got their friend holding a camera and they're shooting a great video. And I think that that's the new economy online. And I think that we have to find a fair and balanced environment where sports, live news, international news, and local news right, are covered and paid for properly, and then all of these kind of social media sides of things are also paid for properly and viewed by the right people, perhaps not behind a paywall, but certainly in their environment. I think that my personal opinion, as I mentioned before, is a lot of this is going to go to paywall, and I'm not necessarily happy about that because we don't have the pass along, right? We don't have these, I can't just hand, my subscription to whatever to my kid or my brother or my neighbor and say, oh, read this article. If they don't have a subscription to the Journal, or they don't have, Ad Week, or they don't have the New York Times or whatever, that's where it is. But we'll pick up this conversation soon enough. Professor Egan, any thoughts before we jump out here? Or are we good?
We're good. Thank you, Simon, so much for
All right.
joining us. Your perspective's really helpful. Thanks
for having me.
We'll have some links in below to kind of connect some of these brands that we've talked about. And thank you guys, everybody, for joining us. Simon, thank you so much. Love having the kind of new perspective of where this is going, because I don't often get to touch on that in my world. So it's good to hear. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.